It's not the time for gradual measures. It's going to be drastic measures. He announced that. So the country is getting ready mentally and psychologically for it, which is something that Macri didn't do when he came to power before the current administration. And so, this is extremely hard. It's a huge challenge. He might fail, but he has to take the risk and he has to go all in. Otherwise, this will be all for nothing. And even his regime might not survive. Because if he doesn't tame inflation, if he doesn't bring back some prosperity, he's not going to be forgiven.
Javier Milei, a libertarian economist, has won a decisive victory in the Argentinian presidential election. Labelled a Loco, the madman by his critics, Milei has proposed a radical agenda, including ditching the local currency, the peso, in favour of the US dollar, abolishing the central bank, reducing public spending by 15% of GDP, and privatising state-owned enterprises. He also wants to reduce the number of government departments from 24 down to just 8, including closing the ministries of culture, women, health, and education. To discuss what Milei's election victory means, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr Axel Kaiser. He's a leading South American libertarian author and political scientist based in Chile. He also happens to be a personal friend of Milei. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start with this very broad question. Who is Milei?
Well, Milei is someone who strongly believes in the role of ideas. He's a professional economist, a technical economist, but he's not only an economist. And in that sense, he's a Hayekian. He, not only because he's not only an economist, and we know that Hayek would say that an economist, that it's only an economist, is not even a good economist. He's also someone who believes in the role of ideas in defining social evolution strongly. And in that sense, we are alike. I've been playing the same role in Chile that he has been playing in Argentina, only I didn't enter politics. And he has been strongly influenced by the works of people like Milton Friedman, Hayek, Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, and others, and also some of my books. I'm happy to say, and he's a man with a mission. He's not someone who wants power for the sake of it. He wants to transform Argentina and to restore the golden age that was lost under the hegemony of Peronism, which is a form of socialism or fascism, if you want. And so he really believes that he's the man for the job. He's extremely charismatic. I actually spoke with him a couple of times in Buenos Aires. I could see the type of rock star that he was. And that's why I predicted he could become president, because, most political pundits, they stay in their rooms and they watch at the screen and then they analyze things. But I was there with him. I could feel the environment around him. And this was the triumph of the younger generations, of the ideas of freedom among the young people in Argentina. And it's the same that's going on in Chile and partly in Colombia and also in Brazil and so on. I don't think the West is paying enough attention to what's going on here, because Latin America doesn't really matter so much to most developed nations. But if you really analyze what we have achieved here, I'm one of the leading proponents of classical liberalism. So I think I can say what we have achieved. It's really remarkable, and I think it's also a good precedent for the UK, and it's also a good precedent for the United States and other nations.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your role in supporting the libertarian movement in Argentina?
Yes, I mean, I actually, before Milei entered the public sphere a couple of years ago, I actually probably was more better known than he was in the country, in Argentina. And actually, when he began speaking on television, they called him the Axel Kaiser of Argentina. And now they call me the Javier Milei of Chile. So he entered the public sphere. And one book I wrote, The Fatal Ignorance, that I published in 2009, where I predicted that Chile was going to destroy the free market institutions and the whole country, basically, because the ideas of the left were advancing rapidly and were being, endorsed by everyone, business people, by even the center right-wing political parties. Well, that book, that was a Hayekian book as well, because I was very much inspired in the Hayek thesis that ideas define social evolution, was very influential on Javier Milei, I think. And he has actually cites the book on television many times. He has spoken about the book. And so I think I played a role there in the way probably that he sees how society functions and the need for having and achieving cultural hegemony. This is a term that was popularized by Gramsci, the communist thinker, but basically we all classical liberals believe that ideas are the most important thing. Not so much the technical economists, they don't know anything about the importance of ideas and history and sociology and literature. But Javier Milei does know that. And I think I might have been an influence on that. And also my book, The Street Economist, was published in Argentina and was presented by Milei and myself. And it became a cornerstone of the free market movement in that country. Like many of my interventions, on media in Argentina, I've been going to television, newspapers for years in Argentina and many other countries in Latin America. So I played an important role. I would say now Milei and I are the two main faces of the free market movement in Latin America.
So,
I think that's a fair.
in kind of diving into the, I suppose, more specific ideas when it comes to Milei, a lot of the international press, particularly the likes of the BBC and the Guardian here in the UK, are describing Milei as a far right figure. That's their headline descriptor. Is that accurate?
Well, they describe, I think, everything to the right of Jeremy Corbyn as being far right. But this is of course nonsense. Why is he far right? Because he does want to dollarize the economy, like Ecuador did, like El Salvador did, and like Panama did many decades ago, almost a century ago. And none of these countries have inflation problems. That's why, and none of them have a central bank. Because he wants to open up the economy, which is a completely nationalistic system, and having free trade, which is the thing that most developed nations promote nowadays. Why is he far right? Maybe because he's against abortion. That might be it. But I think we have gotten used to having center-right political parties like the Conservative Party in the UK and most of the center-right political parties in Europe and in the West, who have embraced the egalitarian and woke ideas of the far left. And so the far left defines who is far right and who is center right, and who is part of the good guys like themselves. So this is complete garbage. And you have a country that is sick. You have 50% of poverty rate in Argentina, almost, and you have 6 million people who are starving in a country that produces food for 400 million. I always say this. And you have 150% inflation, and you are on the verge of hyperinflation. What do you expect? Moderate measures? It's like having a heart attack and going to the hospital and the doctor prescribing you an aspirin or something like that. This is insane. So this is unfair, and it reflects, the left-wing hegemony that is also taking place in the Western world in general and mainstream media. Most of media is controlled by left-wing activists and by left-wing, editors and publishers and people like that. And so
I mean, just to know whether or not, perhaps in a more of a descriptive sense, even if not in a negative sense, whether you'd consider Milei to be on the, I suppose, popular side of politics, in the sense that a lot of his rhetoric is anti-elite, anti what it currently exists and the institutions and the way society currently operates, and makes an appeal against the elite in favour, in a kind of not necessarily contrarian to libertarian principles, I suppose, but there does seem to be rhetorically a sense of kind of populist appeal to him in a way we might see populist appeal elsewhere, even if his policies are very different or his disposition is a bit different.
this is true, But the problem you have in Argentina is that what he says is exactly what is going on. You have a country that basically functions like a kleptocracy, and the system is completely designed so that a few people can benefit from the rest. You have 80 million people, 8 million people living out of 20 million people, and especially it's what Douglas North called a closed system. It's not really a competitive system in any sense, not politically so much, because you had a lot of corruption, and we feared that they were going to steal the election from Milei's hands if this was very a close call, and also in economic terms. So when I say there are a few benefiting, what I mean is you have corporations and politicians, and they are all together in bed. And so it's crony capitalism, to the core. And so you have a cast of people who are exploiting the rest. And yes, you have this 20 million people that are government employees, plus all people getting government handouts and subsidies and so on and so forth, which is the reason why the country is broke and you have 150% inflation rate. But most of those people are not really progressing in any way. They are experiencing harsher conditions of life every day, every single day. Things are getting worse for them, even for people living on welfare. And yeah, you have these few plutocrats, corporations, and politicians who are making millions because they are stealing the money. Argentina is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And you have a system where you don't have competition. That's the reason why you have so much corruption. Of course, you open the doors for runaway kleptocracy or kleptocracy.
For those who aren't as familiar with Argentina, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background on how they ended up in this situation. A country that, as you've said, is got on the verge of hyperinflation. I read today that their economy is expected to be something like 15% smaller than it was in 2011. 40% of people live below the poverty line. What are the policy settings that have led to this kind of economic disaster in Argentina, which I suppose has very much opened the way to Milei's electoral prospects?
Well, it's the idea of nationalist economy. Basically, that you have to restrict free trade dramatically, and you have developed the local industry. This was very influential throughout the 20th century, especially after the Great Depression in Latin America, not only here, in other countries as well. But in the case of Argentina, they never got rid of that. So they have a nationalistic, pseudo-fascist economy that makes it impossible for you to have international competition first, and then you have cartels that have been created inside of the country, and on top of that, you have extremely strong unions that function like mafia bosses, because the law gives them so many not rights is not the right word, is privileges. And they are protected, and they have helicopters. The main union leader of the truck drivers in Argentina, he flies with a helicopter everywhere.
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, and they are rich. They're extremely wealthy, and then you have governors who own hotels and own all sorts of things because the money they steal, and you have politicians who have been caught in scandals spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars actually buying stuff like jewelry, things like that. Not to mention the Kirchner dynasty, which according to some estimations have stole over almost $10 billion from the Argentinian people. And I can go on and on and on.
Yeah,
Recently,
it interesting to me, kind of reading into some of the more specific policies that Argentina has introduced. There's certainly been a lot of calls for them in the UK, with things like price controls on food and energy, which have led to, I'm guessing, quite substantial supply shortages and economic problems. You've got exchange controls, you've got massive subsidies of all sorts of parts of the economy, creating distortions, very heavy taxes, and there was also, I suppose, what you would agree would have driven a lot of the hyperinflation was that the government spending and mass subsidies were being driven by effectively the central bank printing money, a massive increase in the money supply,
Absolutely.
driving inflation.
Yeah, these problems that you are describing, we saw them everywhere in Latin America during the period of the inward development, strategy. We had the same problems. Lots of welfare spending that was funded by the printing money, hyperinflation and high inflation everywhere in Latin America. We didn't have we didn't have the free trade. We had prices that were fixed. In Chile in 1973, we had over 3,000 prices that were fixed, everything. And the same was happening all over Latin America.
The UK also had this up until the late 1970s, early 1980s, and so did India, so did China. I mean, all these economic disaster zones kind of adopted a similar policy set.
I know, but Argentina, the problem with Argentina is while even other countries in Latin America changed and reversed course, they didn't. They continued practicing this protectionist economy, and they are very reluctant to change. Now they are open to change, but they were for decades. And I was always impressed in Argentina that people didn't believe in the free market. You would speak with business people. I gave speeches all over the country in Argentina, and it was very rare that you would find some guy running a corporation or even a farm. They have these haciendas, these very big farms where they produce lots of grain and things. They didn't believe in the free market. They were into protectionism, and because we have to protect local jobs and the standard arguments. And this mentality is what changed now. And pro-capitalist ideas won this battle. And this was the younger generations forced the change. And we have achieved a cultural revolution, this time a libertarian one, peaceful, of course, in Latin America. At least in Argentina, and it's happening in Chile more and more, and it's happening in other countries in Latin America. With the job that we have done, Milei and me and other people. And so this is the thing that no one wants to really see, that if he had not been for the young generations, Milei would have not. He forced the hand of Juntos por el Cambio, the center-right political party that ran the government with Macri and that failed completely. And then Cristina Kirchner and Fernandez came back to power. And Milei won the primary because the younger generation said, we want Milei overwhelmingly. So he changed the mentality. We changed the mentality, but mostly his merit. But we all contributed to that, the few people who are doing this in Latin America. And this is the big news, that you can change a country by changing the youth, how the youth think. And you're seeing that with the woke movement and the problems you see every.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in diving a little bit into some of Milei's policy set. So you've already hinted at one of the highest profile ones, which is the dollarization of Argentina. This is this idea of throwing aside the peso as a currency, adopting the US dollar. And I think there's a lot of concern that it's not practically possible. Even if it's a good idea, it's not possible because the Argentina doesn't have the necessary dollar reserves to pay for the central bank's liabilities. And therefore it's going to be a very big challenge to move to the dollar, if not practically impossible.
You get the reserves, but first of all, you have around $200 billion in cash in Argentina, which is important because part of the economy is already dollarized and people spend dollars to buy everything and people measure everything in dollars. So when you get a salary, even if it's 1,000 pesos now, 1,000 pesos per day, you will say, okay, I'm making $1 per day. So that's the first thing. So if you make the dollar legal tender, it can start circulating right away. And, it can replace to some extent the use of the peso. But now, then you have the problem of government debt.
Yes.
And the central bank debt and all of that. Now, how do you get the dollars? Well, you can come up with clever solutions for that. First of all, you have vaca muerta in Argentina, which are huge oil reserves. And you could bring in billions and billions of dollars in investment, not only to vaca muerta, but also to lithium, because Argentina is one of the largest reserves in the world. You could, and so if you somehow came up with a system that guarantees international investors that you are not going to steal their money and their property once they have invested in Argentina, because that's the main problem. You don't have a rule of law. And for that, you will have to give guarantees in New York or in some other place that in case of an expropriation, these guarantees will be automatically executed, and the investors will be compensated, and so they don't have to go to a trial, and a complicated procedure in order to be compensated. I don't have an exact plan in my mind, of how this could work, but I know some people do have an idea of what you could do. Like Emilio Campo, probably is going to be the next president of the central bank in Argentina, and he's in charge. Who would be in charge of closing
abolishing his own job,
of turning it into an inflation museum. But there are ways. It's hard, yes, we know. But what's the alternative? If you keep the peso, this is never going to be fixed. This problem. This is, it's now or never, I think. And Salvador did it. Ecuador had hyperinflation, and then they dollarized. And so why wouldn't it be the case that Argentina can do it? It's hard. It can fail, yes, it can, but it can also succeed.
The next biggest policy in my mind is the proposals from Milei for across the board massive cuts in government spending. I suppose there's a question about political viability we can get to in a second here, but I'm wondering on a kind of a policy level, is there, how is that going to operate? How is the state going to, I suppose, in Milei's mind, very rapidly and I hope in his mind as well, in an organised way, reduce its size and scale? What's the plan there when it comes to cutting government?
Well, he has 60 to 90 days, in my opinion, where he has to implement all these changes, or start the implementation and announcement of all these changes, because after that you lose the honeymoon. And he won by a large margin. So it's 10 points, that's a lot. So he has political capital where he can do that. And he won almost in all Argentinian provinces. And he almost won in Buenos Aires, which is historically a Peronist bastion. So he has a huge political capital. And if he's not very radical from the start of his government, which it inaugurates, I think, here now and on December 10, then he's going to lose the political capital, and they're going to blame him for the inflation that's going on, because that's the way politics works. So I think that the supports from the public, yes, he will have the public support. They elected him to be radical, not to be moderate. They would have elected Massa if they wanted more of the same. So that's the first point. The second point is he will be able to still blame the opposition if they don't allow him to make the changes. And so he will preserve the political capital in case there is a lot of resistance to the reforms. And there will be a lot of resistance to the reforms, that's for sure. So he already said in his not inaugural speech, but the first speech after he won, that is not the time for gradual measures. It's going to be drastic measures. He announced that. So the country is getting ready mentally and psychologically for it, which is something that Macri didn't do when he came to power before the current administration. And so, this is extremely hard. It's a huge challenge. He might fail, but he has to take the risk and he has to go all in. Otherwise, this will be all for nothing. And even his regime might not survive. Because if he doesn't tame inflation, if he doesn't bring back some prosperity, he's not going to be forgiven. He's going to disappoint everyone. And this he cannot afford.
I wanted to ask you on the...
I'm not that pessimistic, to be honest.
I wanted to ask you on the policy front. There's a whole bunch of, I suppose, his more radical positions often get talked about. His proposal to ban abortion, including in cases of rape, proposals to legalize the sale of human organs, eliminating gun laws. I suppose on that end of some of the more fringe policies, are these likely to actually be implemented or pursued? Are there other policies that are likely to be a far more high priority than those? How are things going to be, like, in what way should we take those kind of things seriously? Or are they just sideshows to sorting out the major kind of economic policy situation?
I don't think this is going to be a priority for the Milei administration. And even so, he would have to gather enough support in Congress to pass these laws. He's not going to waste his political capital pushing forward this agenda. So, banning abortion, and maybe he might propose something like that in order to distract public attention in case things are not going very well, and the public debate is focusing too much on attacking him because this is going to be painful. You have to swallow the medicine when you are ill. This is not something that people like. But the number one priority and the number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, it's inflation and it's economic growth, and it's shrinking the size of government and having a new deal with the creditors and seeing what you do with the IMF, and that's the reason why he was voted into office. I don't think Argentinians now care so much about the other more symbolic issues of abortion and the moral things, moral debates that are involved in these policies, because the situation is desperate. This might be something for the second part of his government, maybe, but I would be surprised. It could happen, but I would be surprised if he starts proposing these laws before fixing the economy. And only fixing the economy is going to be such a huge challenge that I don't think they will have energy left for anything else.
Just back to the size and monstrosity of this challenge. Politically, I think you've already hinted at this, which is that in terms of his position within the political system, he's potentially actually, despite being president, quite weak, for the reason that his party only controls a relatively small number of seats within Argentina's Congress, and I presume, without full knowledge of exact processes, he's going to need a lot of legislation going through Congress in order to introduce his policies. So I'm wondering, what are the realistic barriers? Is he actually going to be able to surpass them? And how are we going to judge his success? Because I think it might be easier to turn around and say, and see him as a failure very soon if he can't get through his policies through Congress.
But this is the most important question of all, because the technical side of the equation, I think you can solve with good economists and good advisors. They will be able to deal with it. But the political part of it, which is getting Congress to pass the laws, Macri, the former president, and Bullrich, Juntos por el Cambio, they will play a decisive role because they have substantial representation in Congress, and they also have, ties to other parties that are mostly opposed to Milei and La Libertad Avanza. So I think this will be very interesting to observe how it unfolds, but I am not really that pessimistic that they will be able to reach some sort of agreement that reforms have to be made, because he's in power now, Milei, and he can offer things. That's the way you do politics. He can offer things to people so that you can get their support, and he won by a large margin. So that also gives him more credibility, even in front of the all the politicians who sit in Congress. and they risk being blamed by Milei, who's no shy in that matter, has no fear, to being the ones who are making it impossible for Argentinians to, end inflation. And so I think it's going to be extremely difficult, but I don't believe it's going to be impossible. We have seen this alliance between Milei, Macri, and Patricia Bullrich, and many other center-right wing politicians who are saying that they will do everything they can in order to help Milei, and this could be the key for him, for his success in parliament. Absolutely.
Yeah,
and without how, if he doesn't have that, he's lost. But he does it. He does have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's notable between when he didn't manage to get an outright victory in the first round of voting. He did very much move a lot closer to the centre right and try to get their support, which is probably what propelled him to this victory in the end. So I suppose it's a question of, can he successfully coalition build and do the right things in the right way. I'm just wondering,
yes.
any concluding thoughts you might have in terms of what we can learn from the UK about this? Because it seems, I mean, you can kind of make an argument for a libertarian presidential candidate, but perhaps only when things get much, much worse, as they are in Argentina compared to the UK. Is that the takeaway here? Is there something here about the way in which he's built a movement around him, a mass popular movement that would have previously just been unimaginable, certainly unimaginable in Argentina? Is it something about him as being personally charismatic? What's really, do you think, driving this, and what should we take away from it?
Well, in the end, it's the same story that happened with the Institute of Economic Affairs and Margaret Thatcher. I mean, this is a result of the work that has been done for decades, and that found the right person to so that the fruits could be enjoyed by the citizens, in this case in Argentina. But I've been doing this job for fighting for freedom publicly everywhere on television for 15 years. Milei has been doing it for 7 years. We have other people who have been doing it for decades. Argentina has a tradition of classical liberalism that goes back almost a century. I mean, of people writing about this and explaining the ideas of Mises. And actually, Milei is a disciple of another very good friend of mine, Alberto Venegas Lynch, who is being recognized by Milei every time he can. He says Alberto Venegas Lynch is like the father and the greatest liberal alive in Argentina. And so it's not that Milei alone made this possible. He benefited from the work that others have done, but it was his charisma, his personality, and his radicalism, his uncompromising, what made him so popular among the youth, and the clarity with which he explains the ideas, which is very important. And his rock star style, he's sort of a Mick Jagger of liberalism. So he's rebellious, he's a sex guru, he's a former soccer player, he's this, he's that. So this is very attractive for young people. And he's very strong as intellectually, I mean. And so I think the lesson for the UK and for the West even is that you have to keep on working on spreading the ideas of freedom, but you need public intellectuals. You need people who go and fight with no fear in the front lines. And that means television, social media, everywhere. Like I've been doing, like Milei has been doing, like other people have been doing it here in Latin America. And you don't have to, if you want to be successful, you have to be, Hayek would say, even dogmatic. A dogmatic defense of liberalism, that's the term that Hayek used, is crucial in order to win the battle of ideas. And this is what Milei did, what we have been doing here. And someone has to do it in other parts of the world, hopefully many people. And we will see how the tide changes. With the politicians we have now in the most center-wing political parties in the West, we are lost. This is not going to work because they have this inferiority complex, vis-a-vis the left. And so they're trying all the time to please the left and not to bother so much. And so that's the recipe for failure. We have seen it with Macri in Argentina, with Piñera in Chile. We are seeing it with the Conservative Party in the UK, and we are seeing it almost everywhere, even in Spain now. especially under Rajoy. So I think that's the main lesson. Milei is the most free market, pro liberty, pro-Israel, pro-Western president in the whole Western world. There is no doubt. And he was elected in Argentina. This is insane if you think about it. It's like a Jew was elected president in Saudi Arabia if they had elections. I mean, Peronism is this. It's not only an ideology, and it's not only a political practice or tradition. It's a culture, and that culture has been now replaced by a free market or libertarian worldview. This is a big story. No one is speaking about this, and people are too much concerned. Well, the dollarization and how is it going to shrink the size of government, which is really important. But the bigger thing here, the larger picture, the bigger picture, so to speak, is the change in mentality that we have achieved in Latin America, in a country like Argentina. Then it will come Chile, maybe other countries, but now in Argentina. This is what we have to learn. What happened there? That we brought the youth to believe in a free market. It's not only because the economy is doing poorly. In other countries where the economy does poorly, you elect a Chavez, you elect a Lula, or you elect someone like that, a far left-wing politician who promises to, take money away from the wealthy and give it to the people. Mm. We changed that mentality among the younger generations, especially.
Well, Axel, thank you so much for explaining that all to us, and quite extraordinary events going on in South America. And I think it's Milei who described Margaret Thatcher as one of the greatest leaders in the history of humanity due to her role in taking down the Berlin Wall. And it is really a flashback to the importance of ideas in politics. So I really appreciate your time and your excitement and your insights. Axel Kaiser, who's a Chilean political scientist and writer, he's got his book, you can see back there, The Street Economist, which is an excellent introduction to some of these ideas, and it's been a fantastic discussion. If you are enjoying, please do subscribe to the IEA's YouTube channel, and if you'd like to learn more about the IEA, just visit iea.org.uk.